Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Alone in the Thoughts Room, Season 2. My name is Ali Ryersi, and in today's episode, I'll be going into great detail about my mother and who she is, and what ultimately led us to stop talking. In future episodes, I'll be talking about how her influence hindered my development and how I had to learn a lot on my own, which, in some instances, I'm grateful for. But with every rose, you get poked with a thorn. I will be talking about the thorns. So sit back, relax, and I want you to know you are not alone. Any kind of abuse is not okay. And if you'd like to follow these episodes, don't hesitate to connect or to even reach out to me to further discuss what is hindering you. Cheers. When thinking about my mother, I get a really bad taste in my mouth because the only parts that still haunt me are all of the moments that I knew she was doing things on purpose. She has a lot of narcissistic tendencies, but I don't believe she actually has the personality disorder. But in my opinion, people with narcissistic tendencies and who choose to be that person are worse because they're choosing. They know what they're doing is harmful and wrong, but they continue to do it because on some sick level, they feel better for doing it. Kids in my generation grew up with a lot of dysfunction in their family, and a lot of that dysfunction had to do with their mothers. So whatever generational thing that happened during the 60s and 70s, it didn't turn out well for a lot of us daughters. Let me put it that way. Growing up was a really big mixed bag because of course there is good parts, and I do believe within every dysfunction you do have a moment where it can be pure joy, but those aren't the parts that stay with us in the worst ways. It's the bad parts, and when majority of the time it's only bad parts, you come at a crossroad and you have to make a decision. Do you stay and endure and enable this person, or do you break away and figure out how to unravel the years of torment and trauma they've inflicted on you? And a lot of us in my generation, we chose to break that cycle and leave. It does help a little understanding how my mother grew up, and God knows she never let me forget it. Her dad, my grandfather, had schizophrenia and bipolar and anger disorders and just kind of a lot of the behaviors that are super physically and mentally harmful. Homicidal tendencies, of course, are thrown in there. There was a lot of tragedy in her house, a lot of blood, and just a lot of sadness and destruction. But, the crossroad that she came to was, do I heal from this trauma and forgive? Because forgiveness, it's not about telling the person, it's okay what you did. It's not about that. It's for yourself, because you have to let go at some point. And forgiving is a huge part of that. And she did not want to forgive. She did not want to let go. She held on to her past for dear life as if it was the only lifeline she had. But I don't think she realizes that she drowned a long time ago Because when you fester in something like that, you develop a very specific way, in a way that only harms others. And I've come to realize that for her, it was a lot of anger, narcissistic tendencies, possessiveness, control. And as soon as she found someone like my father, there was no need to become a better person because she found someone that was happy being a doormat. So growing up, it was a mixed bag and most of it was not good. But there are some moments that I do carry with me and that I'm glad that I had, because it reminds me that it didn't have to be the way that it was. And it made me understand choices a lot more. A lot more. Oh my God. And when I was about 10, I would say is when it really clicked. I was happy regardless of what was going on. I was happy towards my friends. I made the choice to keep smiling. Whereas she made the choice to keep frowning and to make sure everybody around her knew that she was frowning because we were all miserable. My earliest memory is 9/11, ironically enough. And then the memory after that is getting this drum when I turned 3. We lived in a really nice house up in Northern California, 2-story, and they later added a huge playroom. So we weren't poor. We weren't devastated in that way. And she was able to be a stay-at-home mom. For whatever reason, that's what she wanted to do, even though later in life, she never let me forget that having us was a mistake and that she should have went to law school instead. But she chose to be a stay-at-home mom, and our dad was the breadwinner. But she got to be a stay-at-home mom, and our dad provided everything. But even before I turned 5, there was an internal sadness within me, a lot of depression, and I've found childhood journals talking about where I just want to fall asleep and never wake up, is how I put it. Maybe a lot of that was developed in the womb, especially if she had made the decision to never become better. But growing up, she had a lot of anger issues that she always carried with her, and it would come out in really big ways over the smallest things. And she had a nifty little habit of taking everything that I enjoyed as a kid and either destroying it or turning it against me so that I wouldn't enjoy it anymore. I remember being probably about 5, like transitioning between ages, so to speak. And I remember watching her chasing my brother around the house to beat him up. She was trying to catch him to beat him up. And I was downstairs. I'm not sure what could have happened to warrant such a response, but like I said, it was over the smallest things. You could have sneezed on her keyboard and that would have triggered that kind of response. But I remember sitting downstairs, looking up and watching her finally catch him. And I was sitting in my timeout chair, but during her little chase around with my brother, she had told me to go to my timeout chair. And I was sick. I remember having a cold, or maybe I was just so upset to the point that I felt sick. Maybe that's probably more correct. But I ran to my timeout chair, and I remember looking up because our balcony was exposed to the living room downstairs. I remember looking up and watching her finally catch him. And I looked away, and just the noises and the screams, it made me sick to my stomach. I threw up all over myself, but I didn't move. I didn't move from my chair until things started to settle. Probably about 30 minutes after she was done beating up on my brother, I had asked her if I could go get cleaned up because I was still sitting in my throw up. And she told me, no, you can just sit there. And she left me there for what felt like ages. But if I had to take a guess to this day, a couple hours easily. No one ever came to the house. No family really ever came unless it was our relatives from Arizona. But the family that we had there, including like my uncle and my aunt, they never really came over. It was more of all of us going to somewhere to hang out. We went to the beach a lot. And I remember falling asleep under the blanket on the beach. Feeling like I had disappeared. Nobody can see me type thing. But now that I recall that, it makes sense as to why nobody really came over. She did like throwing her parties, though. I will give her that. Easter was always a really big deal. But just for a casual visit, like a check-in visit, come over for coffee or tea, no. None of that happened. And my dad was always gone. He would wake up probably about 4 and wouldn't get home until 9. And every morning I would wake up to go downstairs to, see him off, and he would make warm bottles of milk for me and my brother, and I would carry him back upstairs. Me and my dad have a really strong connection. I love my dad. He's a gentle giant. He really is. His personality, his energy, his mannerisms, the way he thinks about the world, complete opposite from my mother, which makes sense because if you're going to choose to be terrible, if you're going to actively choose to keep the people around you as miserable as possible, you need someone like my father. She walked all over him any chance that she could. My father is the only person I still talk to this day because I would regret it deeply if I hadn't mended that relationship. When I had decided to part ways from, I say from my family, but it was really trying to get away from my mother. He kind of blended into her thinking a little bit, and it made me sad. But then later I realized that it was in fact her talking and not him. I had decided to reach out and mend what little relationship we still had intact, even though we hadn't spoken to each other in years. There is still the smaller things. He won't, I don't want to say he won't help me. He can't help me in certain things because she has him in a point in their relationship where he can't really do anything without asking her. He feels the need to ask her, and especially with him being such an honest person, doing certain things for me would involve not telling her, and to him that's lying. He's not a liar. Bless his heart. So there's still some things that there's nothing that I can do about it, but I rather acknowledge that, accept it, and move forward and keep mending my relationship with him. So because of who he is, she got away with a lot of stuff. And with him not really ever being there, if he was there, I'm not sure how things would have changed. Maybe just in the sense that I would have felt like I wasn't alone a lot of the time. And whenever I was feeling sad, there would have been someone there to comfort me, because whenever my mother did get me worked up to the point that I'd be crying, in anger and sadness, whatever, she would put me in my room and basically tell me to sit there until I stopped crying. There was no comfort from her whatsoever. So, partly growing up in California, only about 5 years of my life was in California, and then we all had moved to Arizona. And at this point in time, I knew to keep to myself and to not really do or say anything that I knew would make her upset, which was kind of hard because it seemed like anything and everything made her upset and get triggered. So I had reserved myself to my room, and that's kind of how I lived my childhood in Arizona, unless she wanted something from me. She would be walking down the hallway, and she has a very heavy, prominent walk. And part of, having empathy and intuition, when you grow up in this kind of environment, this dysfunction, kids can develop their empathy and intuition really fast. Mainly because that fight or flight is always in motion. Your cortisol levels are always super high, and you're always just trying to figure out how to not be the chosen one in the next rampage of her anger. So I memorized the way she was walking down the hallway, and I memorized the way her hands moved because she always liked wearing charm bracelets. I memorized the way her hands sounded when they moved. I memorized her coughing because everything that she did was out of emotion, if that makes sense. Whether that emotion was, calm at the time, or she'd be laughing or whatever, she would always have an angry cough. She had an angry walk. She had an angry way that she tossed her hair. She had, of course, an angry expression, and she had an expression before you knew the storm hit. I memorized all of those things purely out of fight or flight. And my mother, she ended up doing a lot of dark shit. And then, as I got older and went to college and learned about all of these, mental illnesses and disorders and the tendencies that people can have, and the way that our brains develop out of trauma, and depending on what trauma you're enduring, it goes into a specific way, all that kind of stuff. Her actions when I was younger made a lot more sense. And I graduated high school early, and I went to college super early. So I was still a young teenager when I was learning all this stuff. She had a problem with animals. Not in the sense that our animals would disappear because she was killing them, but we always had a horde of animals. At some point, we had a bird, a guinea pig, a rabbit, 4 dogs, 7 cats, 3 tanks of fish, just so many animals like snakes and chameleons. And I never understood why we always had all these animals, because a lot of us were really little. It's not like we ever really took up that responsibility of taking care of any of these animals, but neither did she. And a lot of that responsibility fell on my dad. She would get an animal and then tell my dad to take care of it. And she always had a habit of getting sick animals. So this is where kind of that dark stuff comes into play. I remember having a cat named Boots, and we went to an RV to get him, but he was sick, and she knew that. She knew his ailments, but she didn't care. She never took him to the vet. She only bought the medicine that he needed once. And when his ailments got to the point that she didn't want to deal with them, she stuck him outside. And that's kind of where he lived. And I love animals, and I've always had a strong connection with animals. And so hearing Boots constantly meow outside, I would go out there and hang out with them most that I could when I could. But one night he was meowing at the door to come in, and I was on the computer or something, and I turned to go let him in, and I see my brother. He had beat me to it, and he opens up the sliding door and kicks the cat in the face. I was in shock. I was horrified. So I run outside, and I'm trying to find Boots, but he never came back. That was the last time I saw Boots. They say animals go off and die alone, and that's exactly what he did. There was another time when we went and got a dog, Sapphire. Really beautiful puppy. But for whatever reason, she kept her outside on the side of the house in the dirt. She wasn't really allowed to roam the yard or really do anything except for be on the side of the house in the dirt. And so if I wanted to hang out with the dog, I'd need to go outside in the dirt. And what ended up happening to her was, because of her living conditions, she ended up getting valley fever. And instead of trying to help her or take her to the vet or anything like that, my mother allowed her to get worse and then took her to the pound. And I just remember sitting in the car watching her drag this sick dog into the pound, who was terrified. And I like to think she got a good home. God, talking about all these animals making me tear up a bit. And then there was a time when I was in college. This was when I was 17. She had made me go buy this cat. She was in bed sleeping, as she did most of the day. So she gave me $10 to go get the cat from the pet store because the pound was there. Buster was his cat's name. It got sick. Same old story. Didn't take Buster to the vet. Didn't even get curious enough to investigate what was happening with him. And it got to the point where his epidermis, the layer of skin that was attached to his fur, was starting to peel away from the other parts of his skin. I remember just sitting and looking at this cat, and I'm like, what the fuck? How does this happen to an animal? And so I do all the research that I could, and from what I remember, it was stress induced that this cat endured a lot. And because of it, he was just shutting down. There was maybe another underlying condition, but that's what I could learn at the time. And so I was saving up enough money to take him to the vet. And in the meantime, I was buying these medicated foods that my vet friend was allowing me to purchase. And I was giving him this green liquid medicine combined with moringa powder, which was supposed to reduce jaundice. And he had jaundice. And he was getting better. I was doing enough to the point that he was starting to get better, and I had almost had enough to bring him to the vet, to my vet friend. And there came a weekend with my boyfriend. He wanted to go away to his parents' cabin, and it was winter, the snow was falling, and I had gotten Buster to a really good place that he was feeling comfortable. I was getting money to take him to the vet to see, my vet friend. And so I was telling my mother all she had to do was X, Y, and Z. When I come back, I'm going to get paid and I'll take him to the vet, whatever. She couldn't even do that. She couldn't even do enough to keep a cat comfortable and stable for 2 days. And I came back and the cat was way worse than when his condition physically started. She had undone all of the work. And at this point, the cat needed to go straight to the emergency room. And while I was doing that, she made me take him to the pound instead of going to the emergency room. And so I was in college, and this was a couple of days before finals, and I was taking this cat who was so scared, and realizing I couldn't do anything. She didn't want the cat anymore. So I was like sitting in the room, bawling my eyes out. And I like to think the cat survived. Hopefully. But I was so distraught that I couldn't make it to my final. That's how sadistic my mother is. I don't know why she would just get these collection of animals and neglect them, not have enough room for them. So going back to what I originally said, learning about these disorders and mental illnesses, and specifically bipolar and schizophrenia, that kind of behavior makes sense. But I don't think she has anything heavy enough to the point to get her to a diagnosis. She's just a horrible person. And that's why I say that people with tendencies and who choose to be this way are worse than the people actually having these ailments, because at least they have an excuse. They have an excuse as to why a lot of the time they can't act normal. Her only excuse has been because of the way she was brought up, and you can only use that for so many years on so many things. And she's still like this to this day. I know I broke away from her about 4 years ago, and she was still treating my dad the same way, giving him the silent treatment because there was no clean socks in her drawer for work. She sleeps all day, doesn't take care of herself, and then proceeds to treat everybody else like shit. And because I was the only one calling her out on her behavior, she used me as the sponge, and I always brought to her attention how my sister was acting. And with my sister, the apple does not fall far from the tree. My sister was constantly telling me to go kill myself, to run away, that the family would be way better off without me. And I had brought it to my mother's attention, finally, after the umpteenth text of this vulgarity. And the only thing my mother had to say to me was that it was my fault, that my sister was acting this way. Everything was always my fault. She would say that a lot to me to avoid any responsibility on her part. But while all this was going on, at least I kind of got to do what I wanted. She didn't really care where I was most of the time. So I kind of got to go out and experience life a little bit on my own without her guidance. I got to figure a lot of things out for myself. Luckily, she allowed me to go to school because she had homeschooled all of us, which I did not understand why, because it wasn't really homeschooling. It was kind of just like doing nothing. When I was younger, she tried to teach me how to read for like a month. And, I think I have or had a dyslexia. I had some sort of learning disability where I was slower than most, especially when it came to reading. And she had like this big yellow book that had like the words in it, and there was like arrows underneath the words. And whenever I wouldn't be getting a word right off the bat, she would start yelling at me, and she even threw the book across the room and made me go get it. So I ended up not really asking her anymore to help me with words, and it got to the point that she stopped initiating trying to teach me how to read. So I had to teach myself how to read. And I didn't really start teaching myself until I was about 10. That's when I really started to read more. I started to read more books. And because of the friend group that I was a part of, which it was a lot of mirrors, I had to become a certain way in order to get accepted into this friend group. But at least I got accepted eventually. I had a best friend and she kind of helped me a lot with that. And I also didn't want to be embarrassed later in life, having other people find out that I did not know how to read. So there was a lot of things going on, but I eventually taught myself how to read. I'm not sure what my other siblings did or how they coped with not ever learning how to read. From what I remember, she didn't teach my sister anything. Nothing at all. She probably did with my brother. As the old saying goes, parents try more with their firstborn than any other child. And the last child kind of gets left behind. That's definitely true for my sister. But that's something that still confuses me as to why she wanted to homeschool all of us, but then actually not teach us anything. So a lot of the way I grew up, a little bit of all of us, my brother, he coped in a different way. And my sister is just, she got ruined. But a lot of it with me was mental abuse. My brother got the brunt of the physical abuse, and she just straight up neglected my sister. For a little while, me and my sister got along, but she was resentful towards me even from the beginning, which I never really understood why. And I did ask her one time, but she didn't explain it to me. But for a little while, we were close, and there was a time where my mother, for the first time ever, I saw her, she was getting a little physical with my sister, and it was this huge blowout. We were all crying and upset. I'm not sure what exactly caused it. But she was leaning over my sister. My sister was on the floor on her back, and she was leaning over her, and I just see arms flying, and I get upset at that. So I hit her. I hit my mother across the back, and she turns and she's like, "Who did that?" My brother, bless his heart, "She did it." And then that's when, for the first time, she got physical with me and literally threw me against the wall. And this whole side of my leg ended up getting bruised. I do have a blood scar left from that. So once everything had settled down, there was a rule that nobody closes the door to the bathroom. But for the first time, I closed the door to the bathroom because I did not want her coming in. Well, she came in anyway. And while I was sitting on the toilet, devastated, trying to take a piss, she comes in, just this brazen energy. She pulls my leg to look to see what my leg was doing. She nodded and then turned around and left, leaving the door open. That was another turning point for me that day, that this woman, this person that's supposed to be a figure in my life, was only going to do harm. And when my dad got home that night, I don't know what she told him or how that conversation went, but he had pulled me aside after their conversation, and he's like, "The only way anything is going to get better is if you apologize to her." And I loved my dad so much. I still love my dad so much. I love my dad so much that I placated and tried for a second. I walked behind him, and she was sitting on the couch, chewing on her fingers, looked at me, smiled, and as soon as she smiled, no amount of love could get me to apologize for something that she shouldn't have been doing in the first place. And so I turned around and ran back to my room, and I was like, sorry, not going to happen. I've tried to justify my mother's behavior during my healing process because I didn't want to believe that somebody could actively choose to bring mental and physical terror down on people she's supposed to love unconditionally. And for a little while, I did understand that, okay, well, she grew up in hell, so how can I expect her to be any better? But as I got through college and as I looked back on my feelings when these experiences were happening and remembering what I used to tell myself when I was 6, 9, 12, no amount of trauma you endure as a kid could ever explain the decisions that an adult chooses to make. She chose to stay this way. She chose to hold on and go dark out of pure hate for her. I did not want to be like that. I did not want to be her. And she did try. She tried so hard to make me into herself while suppressing anything that I ever wanted to do or enjoy. Like, she knew that I wanted to be an actress and that I wanted to write and be a writer. I remember writing scripts when I was 10, and I wrote my first short story book when I was 13, and all the poetry that I used to write when I was 7, 8, the singing that I did since I was 4 years old, just standing up on the coffee table and singing my heart out and pretending to play the keyboard. She knew all of it. There was no secret that I wanted to be an artist in any form that took place in. And I was also a really good hand artist. I created a lot of really cool portraits and pictures and paintings and watercolors, and that's just how I loved expressing myself from day one. And even being secluded into my room, by choice, and sometimes not by choice, but just being alone with myself, I got to develop a lot of these skills rapidly. In high school, I ended up selling one of my art pieces, which was really cool. It was a pencil drawing of a bulldog, my friend's bulldog. But she knew what I enjoyed, and she did everything but cater to what I enjoyed. I always did the things she thought that I should be doing. And those things were always the opposite of what I really wanted to do. So from her not nurturing that's in one of the many ways she had tried to turn me into her, because there is no doubt in my mind that she views herself as a complete and absolute failure. But of course, blamed it on me for being born. And whenever I brought somebody home, when I was in high school and college, especially with my college boyfriend, I saw it. I love my feet being rubbed. Like, that is the number one thing I absolutely wanted in a partner, was somebody who enjoyed rubbing my feet. And she looked at me and she's like, you don't need to find somebody who enjoys it. Just train whoever you're with. I was like, no, that's wrong. And that's when it also clicked for me on just how bad she had always treated my father. She absolutely views my father as a plaything, a punching bag, a piece of carpet. And I did not want to be her at all. And then, of course, later, my own experiences with trauma happened, being sexually assaulted, not once, but twice. It brought out the worst side of me. And then by the time I had hit 19, I had realized that even actively trying to not be her, my traumatic experiences and those responses was turning me into her. And so that's when the shadow work started. That's when I really did a deep dive and actively made choices, better choices, to heal myself and to never be viewed as a mistake somebody made, or to be viewed as a narcissist, or really as anybody but a sweet, strong person. life is way too short to allow what has happened to you dictate your existence. You just can't let it. You should want to move past for yourself, for your own sanity, for the sake of the success you want in your future. I'm one of those people that strongly believe that the energy you are and that the energy you decide to keep around is the energy you are going to contain within your soul. And that's either going to move you forward in a negative way or a positive way. And I chose the positive way. And so I had to remind myself all of the intuition I had when I was a kid, the empathy that I used to possess, and the knowledge that I held inside of me but didn't really tell anyone. I had to remind myself all of that was good and to start making this shift. And as soon as I started making this shift, it clicked that I could no longer be in her life. That if I really wanted to be better and to become better, there was no room in my life for her. And that exit, that exit, like they say when you date someone with narcissistic personality disorder or who is abusive, it takes 3 times the charm. And there is a lot of mental breakdowns, especially when you choose to do this and live by yourself. You realize a lot of your faults, and there's nobody around to blame for you for those faults. There's nobody standing in the corner triggering you to have this type of response. It's all you, babe. Which is why I encourage everybody to live alone at least once for a year or 2 in their life. It just has to happen. You discover so much about yourself, the good and the bad. And so the more I discovered, within myself that were the bad parts, I just took a knife to it and slashed it in half. And I was like, no, we are not going to be this way. We are going to be better. We are going to be that little girl you once were. You're going to bring her back into your life. And I guess that was kind of like an empowering moment. Like, you're not going to let her take anything away from you. No matter how hard she tried to beat you down and turn you into a bitch, you're not going to let it. So that's why I absolutely love that year that I lived by myself. And once you realize the energy thing, the energy that I was exuding out of my skin, it made sense that I only attracted a certain type of man, the harmful, narcissistic, abusive type. Except for when I was younger, before those traumatic experiences happened, changing my energy into that, because it's a trauma response and your brain develops off of that trauma. But I did used to be really kind, used to be really sweet. In high school, I didn't really have a set of friends because I wanted to be friends with everybody. Hey, I want to be friends with everybody. And I was dating a really quiet, sweet man. He reminded me a lot of my father. But then that's when, he cheated on me. And then all that other stuff happened. And once again, I was experiencing someone that I thought loved me, betraying me in one of the worst ways. He became my enemy in the worst way when just a few weeks ago we were in bliss. And I talk a lot about that moment in a different little mini TV series that I did. So I won't indulge now, but those are what I like to call dark times. Going through that, going home to this god-awful person, and then by the time that I hit 19, realizing that I did not want to be in this negative bubble, I did a complete 180 and tore away all of the comforts and all of the people in my life that I knew were contributing to me being this way. And then that's when I really noticed the things I needed to work on. So that is why I always say, If you haven't lived by yourself, you need to do it. So growing up was a mixed bag. There were some happy parts, like we got to go to the Nutcracker every year. We won vacation to San Diego and to Disneyland every year. And I got to see the ocean all the time, and I got to learn how to surf. And we like stayed in a resort one time. That was super cool. We got to go on long road trips all through California. Every year we would get together with our relatives, the aunts, my uncle, and got to see everybody, my cousins, and we always did stuff with family. Like once we moved to Arizona, where most of our family was, we constantly did stuff around the holidays and went to the Desert Museum. And I got to be in like this little school film talking about fossils that went out to all the schools in the region, and they were sitting down and watching it. Like I got to do cool things, and I got to laugh a lot. But the parts that were dark and sadistic, that is what I had to come away from. And that's why I'm able to appreciate the good parts more. I want to be able to appreciate and love the good parts of growing up. And I did not see that happening if I had chosen to stay and endure and enable, especially when she chose to be the martyr. And I remember the day I actually called her that. I called her out on being a martyr, that she always used her excuse was, oh, I can't change because of how I grew up. Oh, you're lucky you didn't grow up the way I did, or you're lucky to even have food on the table. You know, you're lucky to have a mattress. It was always, you're lucky, but then I'm also going to blame everything on you. She is still that way to this day. And I wanted to appreciate the good moments for what they were. I am a lot better now. I have no regrets really for anything. I don't think there's a single thing that I go back and change about my life because of the knowledge I possess, because of all of these experiences, because of the men that I met and have slept with, and all of these illicit behaviors that happened because of what I was trying to learn and explore. I got to experience and learn about the world for what it is, what it was. And so I would, if I had grown up any other way, I wonder sometimes, how would I be if I grew up in love and a harmony and comfort? I don't know. Part of me doesn't really want to know. Only a little part of me wants to know, but for the most part, I don't want to know, because I love who I've become because of everything that happened. And that's one of the hardest feelings to obtain, especially when coming from dark corners and tragedy. It's hard to really love yourself after shit like that, but I think once you can find it, it's a feeling you don't want to let go. I don't want to let go of this feeling of triumph that I made it, that I've overcame everything, and that I can still say that I am that sweet little Allie I once knew. And I hope that people who have grown up like this can finally say that about themselves. It is entirely possible. It just takes time. And there's a lot of shadow work that needs to be done. And I know there's still a lot of shadow work that I have left to do. Mainly why I say that is because a few weeks ago, I finally did the little girl exercise where you lay down and imagine adult you going to rescue your little self from everything that has caused you pain. And you got to imagine just removing her and holding her and being the one to say that it is okay, that someone cares about you, and that you always have yourself, and to never stop loving yourself. I finally did that exercise and I bawled for 3 hours straight. But at the end of it, I felt better. And as I'm doing this episode today, I feel a lot of emotion, like, especially like in my face. But I feel a lot of emotion in here still, which tells me that there's more work to be done. And I'm never going to stop doing the work. Like finding your sexuality, you're always healing and learning. And you should always be wanting to be better. I have no malice anymore. I am just finally settling into peace. And I'm going to relish in this peace. And I'm going to celebrate all that I've accomplished despite what she gave me to start with.